Welcome back to Switch to Linux. Well, today we are going to continue our GIMP tutorials where we'll be talking all about selections. We're going to look at the different selection tools that you have, how to save selections for future use, and how to use the various tools in order to get a little bit better option and a little bit better selection. So without any further ado, we're going to jump on over to GIMP itself. So let's head on over to see our view. Now I have this wonderful picture of the cute little kitty cat sleeping, and this is the subject that we're going to use to do a bunch of selections. Now, a few things that you are going to want to do before you get ready: familiarize yourself with the basic selection tools. So we have a rectangular selection tool, we have an elliptic selection tool, we have the free select, we have the scissor select, the foreground select, and we have the fuzzy select as well. Of course, you can do the select by color. We'll mention that just briefly. That has a little bit more limited application, but we'll go ahead and do that. So the other thing you are going to want to do is you are going to want to have the paths tool set up inside of one of your panels. I generally put it over here with my layers. So your paths tool is going to be important because this is going to allow you to create selections from paths and paths from selections. So technically, we might also talk a little bit about the pen tool. We're actually not going to here because I think paths is worth of its own video. But just be aware that the paths tool can do some really cool things with manipulation of selections. We can duplicate paths. We can add things to selections. We can select two paths. We can paint along paths. So there's a lot of things that you can do with selections and the paths section. So let's go ahead and dive on into the different options that we have. First, let's go ahead and grab the select by color tool. It's going to have limited applications for an image like this. It will have a lot of applications for other types of images, particularly things with solid colors, because it does exactly as you would expect. You click on wherever you want to be, and it's going to highlight everything inside of the whole image based on the settings. So the basic threshold. So if I click here, anything that has that basic white color, it's going to select. If I cut this threshold down to 0, it's going to select a very narrow limited amount of things, what just is whatever is inside of that threshold. Now we also have various composite options, which will change to different hues and things like that. But what we're going to do here is you can see it's not particularly useful for an image like this. You also have modes. You can replace the current selection. You can add to the current selection. You can subtract from the current selection, or you can intersect with the current selection. So looking at what these are, if I were to just go ahead and add a selection in here, and then this one here replaces the current selection. Let's go ahead and click on this. And then click on this, it's going to replace that selection. Now, if I go over here and I come back here and I hit this guy, which is going to add to the current selection, it's going to keep the square and add anything else in there. Okay. And then we have the subtract from current selection. So it's going to remove just the things of those colors from the part that's already selected. And then the intersect is going to give us kind of the reverse of that one, where it's going to give us everything within the selection, removing everything that's not in the selection. So these options will be in all of your different select tools. So you want to use those to determine what types of things you might want to do. Now, another thing you do is your hotkeys. Control-Shift-A is going to deselect everything. So Control A will select everything. Control Shift A will deselect everything. So those are also things that you might want to use. So of course, the simplest tools are going to be your rectangular and your elliptical tools. You can just kind of free rectangle, and if you hold your Shift, you're going to get a proportional. So a perfect square here, and if you're doing the rectangular, oval one, you'll get a pure circle. So you can use those. Now, holding the control is going to inverse the selection ability. So you can do a more of expanding. This guy just goes from your start point. This one uses your origin as your center, and then you're expanding out. So in other words, this is your normal, and this is your control. You can see where we start, and it's expanding out from our start point. Okay, and that will be the same option for the square select tool as well. And hit your select button before you push your control button. So you can see that these are options that we have. Okay, so those are kind of basics, just kind of see what you're doing. Now, the other tools that make things a little bit more useful, we have our free select, we have our scissor select, we have our background select, and we have our fuzzy select. Of all of these, I tend to use the fuzzy select the most, just because it does a little bit better job of grabbing just the colors that I need based on my threshold. So you can see if I click down here, it's going to select everything not everything in the whole image, but everything proximity to what I have clicked. Now, the other thing to note is you can quickly grab the different modes here with the different commands. You can see that hovering over it gives me shift adds to the current, control subtracts from the current, and shift control intersects with the current. So if I want to add to this, holding your shift button will add to our current selection. So you can see that that doesn't do super good of a job here selecting the cat if I wanted to just isolate the cat from the rest of the background. So this is probably a case I would not use the fuzzy tool. I would use to one of the other tools. So the free lasso one is a little bit more granular, but it's a lot more of a pain to use. It's pretty much whatever you select is going to be selected. And we're not going to go through and do the whole cat with this. That just kind of gives you the idea. So you can see that it's going to be adding to the different selections and just creating around it. So the good thing is you have a lot more fine control over what you have. The bad news is it takes a little bit longer to get your selection done than you would probably like. Your scissor tool might be a good one here. What this is going to do is it's going to isolate out contrast differences. So if I click two things, you can notice that it's going to find the contrast and it's going to automatically shift the line between the 2 points to the contrast that we want. So this one's not bad. You can see it's not taking in some of this part here and it's overlapping some of this part here. But for the most part, it does a pretty good job. So maybe let's just try using the scissor tool, and then we're going to refine the selection once we have it done. So that's one way that we can isolate the poor little kitty cat here. So let's go ahead and do that, because you can see that this is not nearly as difficult or time-consuming to use as the other one did, but it does make a few more mistakes, particularly that one point there where I didn't quite get it exactly the way it should have been. All right, so hit enter, it's going to select. So now let's say that's pretty good. Let's work on refining this. Pulling open your paths option, hit this button down here is selection to path. Now this is going to save within the image, and then if I just deselect things, if I do whatever else, I can just go ahead and come down here and I can hit path to selection. Whoop, I accidentally copy the selection. Let's not do that. Woo! I'm pushing buttons I shouldn't be pushing. We're going to delete that path, hit this button over here, and it's going to replace the current selection with whatever was in our path. So if I goof something up, I can easily do that. So now let's go ahead and talk about how we might go ahead and make some refinements to this edge. So this is a part down here we might want to fix. So let's go ahead and hit our, let's do add to the current selection. So that guy there, looks like we might need to subtract from the current selection. Let's do this one here. Okay, so hit enter. It's going to subtract a part of it. Now, it didn't subtract everything there because I didn't loop it all the way around, and I should have done that. So let's go ahead and loop this into it as well. And so now we can see that we have removed part of that gap. There's a little bit left over here. And I can come over here, hold my control button, which is going to remove anything from my current selection. And then I can do that. So I can do fine refinements with that. And then let's go ahead and just create the new selection. And let's see which one's which. So this is the old one. We're going to go ahead and just delete that path. So now we have refined one part of the edge, and let's go ahead and refine another one. So let's go ahead and do our free tool again. We're going to add to the current selection. So now that fixes that part up there. And let's go ahead and just save a new path. Delete the old one. So we can go ahead and go through this and refine this. We're going to add to the current selection. We're going to use the elliptical here because I can probably get some easy wrapping around the cat paw like that. And let's do the square to subtract. So just holding down control, you can see that my I didn't save that. So that's why you want to save your paths each time. So we're going to go ahead and do this again. So now we're going to come in here. Again, for the subtract, you're going to hold your control. We're going to take out the parts I don't want to have in my selection there. And I can go ahead and do that through the whole thing. Now, you're going to, if you save these individual selections, then they're going to be saved inside the image. So if I save this as the GIMP image file, the XCF, then it's going to, anytime I open this up, I have the option to go in there and I have the option to refine the selection. Now, I will note that it is actually possible to refine the selection by showing the individual path as well and refining it. So if I were to grab the pen tool and I have the selection over here, then it will actually show me all of the paths like this. This actually affords another way to adjust it because with the pen tool, we can grab an individual point and move individual points in the selection and the path. So that is another option. Like I said, I didn't want to cover the pen tool a whole lot here because there's a lot more caveat to it. But you can kind of see that you do have the ability here to run your selections with your pen tool as well. If you wanted to refine something a lot better in that way, you can. So let's go ahead and do that. And let's save that selection as well. Let's kill the old one. That way I always have the better selections. All right, so now though, let's look at another tool. That was remember we started that with our scissor select tool. We looked at the fuzzy select tool, which wasn't as good. The last one in this form is the background select tool. Now this one's really designed to pull out an object out of a much more contrasty background. And there's a few steps to it. So we're going to start with just drawing a picture around the cat. Okay, we're going to restart that because I didn't have the whole cat in view. And so not having the whole cat in view messed me up over there. So let's go ahead and this. We don't necessarily need to get right on the line. You can see I'm not being as careful as I was with the the free select tool to highlight just the cat right on the edge. This one here, I'm actually going to let the program itself determine what we need to do. So once you have made your full circle, hit enter, and then this guy is going to give us the mask. And now we're kind of in a paintbrush mode. So at the paintbrush mode, we're going to come over here and we're going to highlight parts that we want to be involved in the selection. So we'll go ahead and start with the larger tool here. And we're going to do, doesn't have to be perfect, but we're going to make sure that we get as much as in the inner part of the image as we can. And then what we're going to do is we're going to drop down the paintbrush edge. And we're going to go out just as far as we need to. Just basically, we're going to make as close of a connection in here as we can. And then we'll see how the program does at sorting out the difference. Okay, so that is pretty good. So now we're going to go ahead and hit select. Now, depending on your computer there, this may take a lot or a little bit of time. And I did find on my Arch system, this actually seems to freeze. I don't know if it's because I'm not giving it enough time or if there is actually a legit problem on Arch, but I actually encountered a case where it froze on me. And what we see here is that this actually does a really, really good job. There are obviously a few refinements we need to make, but most of the refinements are actually outside of the cat, not inside of the cat. And this actually makes it a really good option, and it will even fuzz out around the images there. So let's go ahead and save this one as well. So let's just rename this guy as Scissor, and then we're going to rename this guy as Foreground, which is the Foreground Select tool. Okay, so now that we have this, if we wanted to go ahead and maybe let's isolate the cat now. So let's right click, add an alpha channel, which is going to make sure if I delete things, it's going to give me transparency in the background rather than my background color. And since the cat is selected, we're going to go up to selection and we're going to invert the selection, hit delete. And now we've actually done a really good job of isolating the cat. You can see that there's really only a few places there where it's not as good. And you can also notice it has a fuzzier border around it because the foreground selection tool does feather it a little bit. And the feathering is actually one of the things that works that makes an image really good when you're doing editing. So we're going to go ahead and refine this manually using the basic eraser tool. And I'm actually going to grab a fuzzy edged brush and then just pump up my size just a little bit. And now we can come over here and just erase with a fuzzy edge the few of the things that shouldn't be here. So now when I paste this image into something else, it will actually go in there and it will blend itself in quite nicely. So do that. So I'm just going around it with just your eraser tool with a fuzzy brush. I didn't grab a thick brush, I grabbed a fuzzy one. So that way if we get into any of the cat, it still gives us kind of a fuzzy edge, which is a better way of blending the image in. And that's pretty much all the refinements we needed to make. So if we're happy with that refinement and we would really like to save this one as a separate selection, we can actually do that if we go in here and probably just grab the fuzzy select tool now. And I can kind of see, I will occasionally do this to see if there's anything else I need to do. So I need to get rid of a little bit here, here, and a little bit down there. So let's go back to our eraser. I'm going to examine what the spots are now. If I go ahead and try and erase, it's not going to erase anything because those are the parts I need to erase. Let's go ahead and do that. So that's a little bit better there. All right, so now let's hit that guy again. That looks much better. So now we're going to go back to our paths and let's go ahead and hit that. And then we'll call this one the refined. So now I will have the option to save that selection as if I drop this image into something else. So I want to put it on a background or something like that. Then I have the ability to very easily isolate the cat out again, although it's on its own separate layer right now, so I probably don't need to do much more with it. But there is a brief tutorial there on how you can use the selection tools. Remember, you can add the selections, you can remove from selections, you can intersect them, you can subtract, and then you can save your selections as paths. And saving things as paths is a very useful thing. I do this in numerous of my images that are reused over and over again, just for the simple case of just fixing stuff up. So anyway, there is a little bit about how we are using the selection tools in GIMP. Let me know in the comments down below which tools you would like to see a little bit more refined use on in the comments down below. Thank you for watching this video from Switched to Linux. This channel would not be possible without the backing of the program supporters scrolling on the screen now. You can be a supporter at Patreon at patreon.com/TOMM or at thinklifemedia.com. I also want to thank the open source community who creates such excellent software that makes producing this show possible. Please remember to support your software communities. Thank you, and I hope that you enjoy switching to Linux.